Hi, welcome to For the Culture Canada, the center point of art and entrepreneurship. This is episode 49. I know it's been a little bit of a minute since I uploaded my last episode, but I'll get into that a little bit later, and I'll also provide some more details actually on my social media. But anyway, today I have somebody that I've actually wanted to get interviewed for a little bit here. He actually reached out to me after I interviewed his son, Next Side, and wanted to just sort of, give a little bit of a brand informative discussion, and also I wanted to sort of dive into what he does, because the thing is he's quite multifaceted in what his ventures are. So he is a business and brand management mentor. He's also a basketball coach, and also he is an author. He has written the book Chocolate Covered French Fries, available now on Amazon and all sorts of different other places. I'm sure he will let you know, but I am of course talking about Kevin Kishor. Thanks for being a part of the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. I know we've tried to make it work a little bit earlier, and it just schedules don't line up and stuff, but I'm finally glad that we have you here.
Yeah, man. There's no time like now.
Definitely. But you've had a good day so far?
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah?
The weather's a little crappy, but,
Oh my God,
it's all
I know.
good. We got to be thankful for the rain anyway. Rain brings growth, right? So,
Yeah, totally. And at least it's not snowing anymore.
yes,
So
100%.
yeah, thank God for that one. All right. So before we get into all of the stuff that you do, inevitably, I want you to talk about your past a little bit. So tell me, man, where were you born, and how'd you get to the place that you're at? Like, how'd you grow up?
Oh, man. Okay, well, let me see if I can give you the short version. So I was born in the Toronto area, just outside of there, a place called Kitchener. A lot of people don't know where that is. It's funny. It's everything outside of Toronto is kind of getting swallowed up by Toronto. Mm-hmm. But Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, the Tri-Cities, like 500,000 people, so it's not really that small. But so my pops lives in Toronto, and his whole side, and my mom's side lived in Kitchener, so that's where I was born. Grew up there, did my first degree there. And then came out here, out west. Had no idea. Took a huge leap of faith. Kind of felt like I had a calling, which was, like my previous life. I always say, the first major chapter in my adult life. I was doing a lot of service, kind of doing a lot of ministry, like in the church and stuff like that, which actually my son talked a little bit about in your interview with him.
Yeah.
The music and that sort of thing. And I would have never thought I saw my life going that way when I was young, because I was a little bit of a badass when I was young. And so I would say God has a sense of humor, And so anyway, so I did that for a while. I've been out here for a minute now, but always homesick. So I go back and forth a lot.
Sure. Yeah, well, what drew you, what about the West drew you to this so much?
Nothing really, actually. It was just that whole calling thing. My mom's came out here first, right?
Yeah.
And I came out here and actually went to visit and just to check it out, because my ex-wife wanted to really live out here.
Right.
She wanted to change, because where we grew up, there was a lot of stuff that kind of wanted to get away from, because we had kids and wanted to give them a little bit of a different, get them out of like some of the trouble that we had when we were growing up. Right. And it's definitely like smaller, cleaner, quieter out here. Right.
Right.
And it's funny, because I had already started working with youth back then. And back home, it was like clear cut what I was doing. You try to keep young people off the streets. You try to keep them out of violence, gangs, drugs, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And when I felt like I had that calling out here, I came out here and I was kind of like, whoa, what am I doing out here? Like my spiritual life kind of really kicked into gear. I was like, God, what do you want from me? These kids out here, they're very different. There's none of that out here, right? You don't see the poverty as much. You don't see the gangs. You don't see that, And so, ironically, it was the message I got was that people out here have choices that maybe people where I was didn't have as much. And so if they have choices, help them with those choices. That was the message I got. It was like, be like the wind in people's lives. Like, that it's a force to be reckoned with, or that it's there, but you can't see it moving, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of the time, so that was what shaped like the first decade probably or more of my life out west, and then. And so and so now that I'm coaching people, like I'm still coaching people in basketball. I'm coaching people in business and life now, especially with the book and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's a similar type of thing that I'm still doing.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And in terms of like when you came over here, obviously Toronto to Vancouver, that's like a pretty normal move for a lot of people. But then you chose Kelowna. There's lots of other little towns around, right? You could even chosen the island. What about Kelowna drew you here?
It was well, partially because of my mom's, but the message that I got actually, which was, it's kind of freaky because not a lot of people have those kinds of experiences where they feel like the voice of God or whatever spoke to them. Right?
Yeah.
And for me, it was very clear. Like when that happens, you don't forget it. And the message to me was, how much do you love me? Are you willing to sell everything that you own and follow me into the desert and meet me on the mountaintop? And that back in Ontario, we didn't have mountains for one or a desert, right? And I had no idea when I took that leap of faith to come out here. We sold everything we owned after that. 6 weeks later, we got on a plane and we came out here. We had no idea what we were coming out here to. Just called my family out here. It was like, we're coming. Right. And the mountains are here. They became a huge part of my spiritual journey. And then I found out the Okanagan's the only hot desert in Canada, right? And I was like, wow, So, it just slowly unfolded after that. It literally was just blind faith at that point.
Wow. How did that come to you? Was it intuition, a dream?
No, it was just that voice like inside. And I was actually laying on the couch watching basketball. And I sat up like it was that powerful in me. And, at that time I was married and my wife was in another room and we had kind of buried this conversation about moving like 6 months prior.
Yeah.
We hadn't talked about it. And I just sat up and I was like, hey, we're going. That was all I said. And she knew what I was talking about. She dropped what she was doing. She got on the phone, called my grandmother. She's like, book our tickets. And that was it. 6 weeks later. Yeah.
And so then what did it feel like when you touched down?
It was just like new ground, right? And like, see, I'm a Christian, and so the story of Abraham was always really big for me. It's funny. I didn't think our podcast could go this way, but we're talking about my past, right?
No, it's all good. It's all good.
But like Abraham, he was one of those guys. He's the guy, right? Like he was asked to leave his home and to just trust and go, and he was promised that he would be like given abundance, like in terms of his legacy and all that sort of stuff, and children and whatever. And so that's what he did. He left his home and his family and he went to this unknown land.
Right.
And so that was literally what it was like. It was like a fresh start. It was like I was smoking back then at that time.
Right.
And I remember when I was at Toronto airport, I threw out my last pack of cigarettes before I left, and I had a 6-year run right after I got here, no smoking, cold turkey. It was literally a fresh start.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like in every way.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And so I just want to...
Funny story, though, before
Sure.
I cut you off there, because you interviewed my son, right?
Yeah.
Elijah, our next side. And my wife at the time, we had already had our oldest daughter, Sade, who's, give her a shout out. She's the brand manager at Perch now, a cafe that just opened up, and their events coordinator. Super proud of her. But so we had her already. We had her when I was in high school. And so I don't recommend that to anybody, just saying, but we had, since we already had one kid and we were kind of headed down that road towards staying together in marriage or whatever, we're like, let's try for another one. And it just wasn't working when we were living in Ontario. And then when this happened and we took that leap of faith and we came out here, and that whole spirit of Abraham or whatever that I was saying, right after we got here, Elijah, or next side, was conceived. Like, boom. It was like that sort of like first blessing in a way,
Yeah.
I know that like, as kids grow, whatever, sometimes it doesn't feel like that. But,
Yeah.
But at the time, it was seen that way. It was like,
Yeah, no, I get you. And as, say, next side was growing up and your kids were growing up, right? Did you find that, because I've always loved kids, even when I was a kid, I just loved playing with kids, but I was just sort of like, I just think about when I have a kid and what it's going to be like, and just sort of seeing like, oh, that kid has like my, the mother's personality or my personality or a mix between the two. Was that what it was like for you, or?
Yeah, it's funny because him in particular, because you know him.
Yeah.
He's I always say he's a lot like me. Like he reminds me of me. Like when I used to go pick him up at high school or whatever, and I'd see him walking down the street. Like I'd be like, damn, am I looking at myself? Like the same kind of swagger and whatever. And kind of easy with the ladies and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
But he's got his mother's temperament, like more her personality. So you could kind of see that, like definitely like tendencies and that sort of thing. And so he's the second oldest of six.
Yeah.
Right. There's six of them, and it's definitely you can see a lot of each of them in that sense, and even just the mix in cultures, as we're talking about for the culture Canada.
Yeah.
I feel like my kids are like a representation of Canada. Russell Peters, the comedian.
Yeah.
Everybody loves Russell, right?
Yeah.
And he says everybody's gonna be beige someday, right? Because everybody's mixing, right? And so their mom's Canadian, right? So she's white.
Yeah.
And both my parents are from Guyana. So British Guyana is like considered Caribbean, like Trinidad and Jamaica, but we're not an island. We're on the tip of South America.
Yeah.
So we're like, we're really mixed. Like on my side, we're like Black, Chinese, a little bit of Portuguese, East Indian, Creole, French, and I always forget. So I'm always forgetting one. But so 6 things, and then they got their mother's mix, right, which is typical Canadian mix. But so they're like Canada right there, and you could see it reflected in each of them. Mm-hmm. But anyway, it's crazy with all of them. So the book, which is definitely inspired by a lot of my life, obviously.
Yeah.
The first book. This is the first of 3, and so the second book is actually going to be on love and spirituality. And the third book is going to be, the title I'm working with right now is Father of 6, Master of None. So,
that's a funny one. I like it.
Which is actually exactly what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Like the dynamics and all the mix of all them,
Yeah.
But yeah, they'll be unnamed, that's for sure.
Yeah. Is it a trip watching your kids grow up?
Oh man, it's nothing. They say there's 2 things you can't prepare for in life.
Yeah.
One is losing a loved one, which I think you experienced recently, right? Did you go through a lot?
Yeah. My grandpa passed away a couple of years ago. We just spread his ashes in India last November. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's, I guess, a blessed experience that you'd be able to be a part of that, right? Even though it's tough.
Us spreading his ashes, one of the most interesting and blissful experiences of my life. It was so surreal.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
So they say, you can't prepare for that no matter how many books you read or whatever, or you hear from other people. And having a kid, those 2 things, they just change you. And that's why I always laugh. Like I spent like a decade helping people decide if they want to get married and get them to the altar, and then like supporting families afterwards and all that, which is also another motivation behind the book. It was crazy. Like people would always tell me, "Oh, I'm not ready to have kids. I'm not ready to have kids." And I get that, like people want to, even if they're married or they've been married 5 years or they've been whatever, they want to be in a certain economic place, or they want to, like have a house. They want to do this, whatever. But the reality is you never be ready. Like it just doesn't matter how old you are. Like we had our first when I was like 16, turning 17.
Yeah.
Right. Definitely wasn't ready.
No.
At that time. And then we had our last when I was like, we had them all by the time I was 30. Right.
Yeah.
So totally different like age and stage. And, I had a career, I had a house, I had, it was changed me. Every one of them changed,
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Yeah, definitely. What was the feeling like when you had your first one compared to when you had your last one?
It's definitely different. The first one was like, I was like, oh God, because my dad and I didn't really have a close relationship, even though I was always with him in Toronto or whatever, like kind of thing. But it's just his personality. He's not like a communicator or, or affectionate or anything like that, right? Like he's just like provide and kind of like, as long as you're not screwing up, like we're good, like kind
That's
of
exactly like my dad, It's like immigrant parents, we know what it's all like.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So then when I had the first, because I obviously didn't expect to have a kid at that age.
Sure, yeah.
I was like, man, like me and God wrestled a lot. I was like, really? Like, you want me to be a father? Like, knowing already, like, the path that I was on at that time.
Right.
And that I didn't really have a good role model. My grandfather, too, that that lived with me growing up on my mom's side, he was like, you know, he was not same thing. Like he was not really around, you know, he was like a recovering alcoholic, you know, that sort of thing. And so the role models weren't there, right? And so I was blown away, like to see this life. Oh my gosh, this life is like entrusted to me now.
Yeah.
Jeez, you know, like,
yeah. You must have learned a lot, though. Your maturity level must have very much changed, or at least it must have developed in a different way than it would have otherwise had you not had that kid at the time. Hey.
Yeah, you definitely grow up. Like there's no question. You got to grow up. Which actually, that's not true. You always have a choice, right?
Yeah, of course.
And at that age, like the choice for me at that moment, at first wasn't like marriage and like house and all that kind of stuff. It was like, am I going to be a ghetto bastard? That's what we used to call them back in the day, right? Is like, 'cause there was so many like dudes who were living like I was living at that time, like kind of running around, getting into trouble or whatever. Mm-hmm. And just having kids and just leaving the moms to do their thing, you know, like kind of, and it was very normal or common, I guess.
Sure, yeah.
And so the first question for me was, am I going to be a dad or not, right? Can I be? And so that was like, yeah, okay, I'm going to accept this challenge. I'm gonna be there, you know, whatever that looks like, and so that just changes your whole mentality. It's like, okay, you're responsible for somebody else right now. This little person. It's kind of funny because my oldest, she was in my high school yearbook. You know, she came to my first university degree. Sometimes with me, she would come to class with me sometimes, and then in my master's program, she came to class with me. She was at university or getting there or whatever at that time too.
Yeah.
So it's just totally different. Yeah. But I definitely had to, I just had to fend for myself. So that's why, like now that I have kids that are that age, you know, like the three oldest are like 23. Next side is gonna be 19 any minute now, and then Trinity, the Miss Model out there, big time now. She's Vancouver Fashion Week the other day. Yeah, it's crazy. Now it's 16. She's 16 now, and like when we're talking about when I was 16, right? Like what I was doing. Yeah. And so for me, it's like it's hard for me to be like, oh, you know, like life must be hard for you, you know, like kind of thing. Because I'm like, I had to do whatever we had to do, whatever we had to do. You know, like my mom's had already moved out here. My pops was living in Toronto. And so we're like stuck in the middle. And, you know, we had to go on welfare to get through high school. And then I had to take big student loans. I mean, praise God, like you said, you love this country and the opportunities that are available to us. In my first degree, what was available to me at that time was I ended up borrowing $100,000 from the government in total for just to get through my first degree because I had to live off of it. Yeah. But in the end, I only had to pay back $43,000 of it.
How's that?
Because they had this big forgiveness program back then. They had a lot more incentives and grants and whatever, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But when I did all the math, I was like, damn, you know what I mean? Like that's a lot of money. I could be a doctor for that. I was like, what was I thinking? You know?
Yeah, dude, that's a lot of money, man.
It is, yeah. But I mean, we're blessed here, that's for sure, you know?
Yeah, definitely. How often do you think about that kind of stuff? Are you a first generation, by the way? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm, I was the second child born when they came over to Canada.
Yeah, I'm the oldest child, first generation, and I'm just like, I honestly, like now that I'm older too, I think about it all the time. I'm like, wow, you know, I could be not at this place at all whatsoever. You know, my accent wouldn't sound anything like this. I wouldn't have these computers, this audio engineering certificate that I have, like all of this stuff. I wouldn't even know you existed. Had my parents made like a decision to second guess coming here, you know, blows my mind.
For sure. It's funny that you talk about, I used to do that a lot when I used to teach about purpose. Like I used to help, like especially grade 12 students and university students. That was one of my favorite things that I did in my past life, I call it, right?
Yeah.
I used to talk about like appreciating where you came from in that sense, that we say life is a rowboat. Actually, in my book, the epilogue or whatever is rowing like Chris Rock, right? Like kind of thing. And it's that whole like rowboat idea that you can't see where you're going, but you can see where you've come from in that sense. That's one of the big things that I learned. And so when you look back, like in my first degree, I had the the honor, I guess I would say, of doing an independent study on my family roots, and I was able to see like who came from where was the slavery, where was this, that, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, and like my grandfather, I told you that I grew up with, lived with me. I didn't like him. We didn't like each other. You know,
Right.
but I was grateful for him because it was his decision to come to Canada.
Right.
And back home, he was like, he's still like, our family still has oceanfront property in Guyana.
Wow.
And he left that. He was like kind of big time. He was, he was like a plumber or whatever, like, or engineer, kind of like, there was a lot of that in my family.
Right.
And he came to Canada. When when immigrants come to Canada, they can't do what they did.
No, of course.
Then. He ended up being a chicken peeler at Swiss Chalet for 20 years.
Wow.
Just to give his family a different opportunity.
Yeah.
And they stopped in Tortuga, the island, on the way here. They were going to settle there. But
Yeah.
he chose. He's like, nah, I'm going to Canada. And if it wasn't for that, I mean, life would have been completely different for me.
Yeah, and we always have to pay. I mean, it's just like you always have to pay props for that kind of thing, right? Like they took the brunt of the force, so in the long term, their family could do better, you know.
Yeah.
And man, I just can't help but think, man, holy shit, I'm so thankful that my parents are here. Like all I want to do is just work hard so I can get my mom and dad a new house, you know what I mean? Or like get them anything that they want, you know? I don't want them to work ever again, but anyway,
they look like they're doing all right though.
They're doing okay. They're doing fine. They have their health and I'm incredibly happy for that, you know? But and it also, what's interesting is that you seem like you've had like from you talking about God when you were 16 years old, it seems like you've always had it, even though you were saying that you were kind of a badass. You seem to have a tight connection with faith, or it seems that way.
Yeah, for sure. So my dad's a Hindu.
Oh,
wow. My mom's a Catholic. So, and in my family, it's very diverse. Like we got Muslims, Jehovah's Witnesses, Pentecostals, you name it. Like any kind of religion is in my family. And so when I decided to make a change at that age, when I became a father and all that stuff, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to university, pull my socks up. What am I going to study?
Yeah.
Right. And I chose to study religious cultural history. That was my first focus in school.
Yeah.
And it was just because of that. I'm like, this one family that I have, everybody was different in terms of how could they all be the same family, but they all have all these different beliefs. Yeah. And I'm like, I just want to know. I want to, I got to be able to love them. I got to be able to, like, whatever, like find some common ground, right? And so I was always super fascinated by that. And so as my like adult life and my career has come to, I guess, fruition in a sense, is I think people have come to see me as, I've heard, as like a sort of a specialist in the things that are unseen, I would say. Okay. And so that's why the second book is on love and spirituality, because I see them as two sides of the same coin, because love is something that's like, it's unseen, like it's really hard you can't touch it, smell it, like kind of thing. Right. And it's the same with spirituality. It's unseen, and our beliefs and like God and all that kind of stuff typically is, and I find them really interconnected, and those things really fascinated me. So some people, there's other unseen things, like our psychology and stuff like that too, right? But science has a different hold on that, right? And so, I guess while we're talking about that, kind of a little bit on the book, like the segue there is that I really became to believe strongly that we don't get prepared for that. Right. So, a lot of people talk about we don't ever get prepared how to handle money, for example, in school. No. They don't teach you how to really do that. Right. They also don't teach us how to have relationships. True. Very true. Yeah. So when you think about that, it's like, all right, well, I think there's more of an effort now. Like people, they're trying to teach like emotional intelligence and things like that in school. Very important. Yeah. Yeah. Very important. Like, when you don't learn about it anywhere, where do you pick it up? You pick it up from maybe your often dysfunctional examples at home. You know, like even the best of parents are dysfunctional in their own right, in your own home, right? Like you show the worst parts of yourself to those who you love, right? So that's just how we are. And then that, or you pick it up in the media. And so like, especially kids these days, like they're growing up, who are they watching? Like the Kardashians, and, I mean, no disrespect to them, you know what I mean? Like every family's got their stuff or whatever, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like who are the role models, like for my generation, it was like the Cosbys. Yeah. And we all know how that ended. Oh my God.
God, yup.
We ain't going there.
We ain't going there. No.
Well, let's say Fresh Prince too.
Sure.
That was a good family that we got.
Honestly, that episode where Will wants to go hang out with his dad, but his dad dips, and Uncle Phil then resolves the end of the episode, and oh my God, I've never been more closer to crying while watching a TV show than that, dude. Like that hit hard.
Yeah. So I mean, it's funny. I don't feel like there's a lot of shows like that anymore.
No,
I think,
no, there isn't.
But anyway, maybe there are, but I just haven't found them. But,
It all seems to be stuff that's a little more out there, you know what I mean? Like a lot of it is a little more fantastical, you know, like Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad. I don't know, that's not even a thing anymore, but that kind of stuff, you know what I mean?
True. It's like paranormal stuff or like Vampire Diaries and
like all exactly
those things. Yeah.
I mean that sitcom format kind of died obviously as we know it, right? That's all dead now, but you're right though. The thing is, people in their teens, like I didn't experience any sort of place to learn about emotional intelligence or how to treat a person like an actual person. I mean, like kids at that age, all they know when it comes to like relationships and stuff is like porn, and like porn is not the. It's an awful place.
It's actually the worst. It's like, trust me, it's like it totally distorts. Like when we talk about relationships, like sexuality is a whole nother piece, right?
Yeah.
Which I don't even get into. I don't touch in the book really, and I don't really touch love like as a whole because I think like love and intimacy and all that. That's why I think they need their own book, right? Like a separate
100%.
book. And but yeah, like our culture is so oversaturated sexually, and for men in particular, I think women are naturally more like wired for relationships, and it's just biological. I believe it's just how we are, but men, we struggle more in that way, and we also don't tend to seek out like help in that area or growth. It's just we're more focused on success, which is not a bad thing, or a competition, or strength, or whatever it is. Those are the things that we pursue more often, right? And so I don't know, I mean, maybe that's part of my what I'm gonna leave as a legacy, I hope, you know. And I'm sure it's funny because I think like my hope has always been that my kids someday will be able to say I learned a lot about how to be in good relationship with people, despite like my failures. Like obviously my first marriage ended like with their mom, and that was hard, and nobody ever gets married in planning to end it, right? Like
no.
But through our failures or through our missed opportunities or through our mistakes or whatever, if we don't grow or learn from them, like then what's the point, right?
Of course.
They just kill us, right? In that sense. So, but I still hope that my kids will someday be able to be like, you know what, my dad was an example of whatever, like, of how to live or how to be in relationship with people, or, in that sense. So that's my hope. And then, my writing and my vlogging and all that stuff, if I can spread that in the world, that's even better, it's great. But
well, that's the beauty of what we have going on today, right? Some people may look at this way or that way about social media, but the one thing that you can always say is that it will permanently leave your mark as an individual based on what you put out there. So given that you are doing what you're doing, obviously you're there to enhance people's relationships and solidify a positive message for people out there, right? I was reading into your blog a little bit, actually, quite a bit, and I was reading about how the inspiration of the title for your book was actually from your kids, right? So explain that a little bit.
So I do talk about it in the introduction too of my book, so I don't want to give too much away. But but yeah, you're right. I did blog about it early on when I first started blogging. But just my one daughter, my 16-year-old, we were on a road trip and she just brought it up. She's like, "You ever had chocolate covered French fries?" And we were talking about this in the car the other day too, and she was telling the story to the other kids. It was just kind of random, and this is how my mind works. I just made a parallel there, right? And so I kind of break that out a little bit in the book, but in a nutshell, it's like with anything, when you put something together like that, like chocolate and French fries, it could be delicious or it could be a disaster, right? Like kind of thing. And so I believe that in relationships, it's the same. Like, on their own, chocolate and French fries are delicious. Most people would agree.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, but like putting them together it may not always be good. And so it's the same with people.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where it kind of started. The original title for the book was The Relationship Code, cracking the chaos of our culture.
Yeah.
But you know, I kind of just moved away from that. It felt kind of dry.
Yeah.
And then this thing just kept coming up, the chocolate covered French fries, and then people are like, "Man, that's catchy," you know? Like
it is.
And
it
then,
is.
It's funny because you said you used to work at Cactus, right? So
Yeah.
a little shout out there. One of the managers that used to be at the Cactus here at Kelowna downtown. We were there. The boys and I were there one night, and we were talking with. And he's like, "Yeah, tell me about your book." And I was telling him about the title, and he's like, "Scott, right?" And he's like, "Have you tasted it yet? Chocolate covered French fries, right?" And I'm like, "Actually, I haven't." And so it comes back like 5 minutes later with a plate with fries in chocolate sauce, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so the picture on the cover of my book is from
Cactus Club
that night.
Yeah.
I took that picture of the fries, and then we ate them, and they were delicious.
Yeah. We're happy to hear it's actually delicious.
Yeah.
Beautiful. It's kind of poetic in a way, actually, that it turned out to be good. But I noticed that, dude. Like, come on, man, I worked there. I was like, oh, this guy went to Cactus Club. He got it's basically the moose shot. Yeah. Yeah, god damn, that shit's amazing. And their fries are fantastic too. But I know Scott. He actually transferred over to the location that I worked at.
Banks Road now.
Yeah.
No, that's cool. I mean, that whole, like, while we're talking about the book.
Let's go into it.
You know, so when I left my first career, like my main career that I had for all those years that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
I decided I went through a real tough time, went through the divorce. I literally hit rock bottom, and in a sense, like not rock bottom, probably maybe a little bit in the traditional sense of what people usually associate with like alcoholism or whatever, like kind of thing. But rock bottom in the terms of like I was devastated. Like I lost everything. I had to file for bankruptcy because we had owned another business before and all this stuff. And that was really tough for me. Like I literally like sleeping on the floor for a while. I was just like, you know, I was riding my bike. So that I could make sure, you know, I wanted to make sure any resources I had at that time that I could support like my kids and my ex-wife or whatever.
Sure.
Just to make sure that everybody was good. And then slowly I rebuild myself. Right.
Yeah.
And so then, you know, we built the basketball academy that we had. And that was a huge win for me. That was the first step. And then from there, the brand management thing grew because I already had my own corporation. Decided I need to fill it with something.
Right.
And I just knew that this was evolving and the principles that I was applying was the same all the time.
Yeah.
It was like kind of the discussion you and I had before. It was like, you know, some of the things that being in this new space, you were talking about social media and how the world has changed. It's like, how do you tell your story? You know, who are you? That sort of thing. And how do we make use of all these mediums that we have now? And I was just like, wow, I became a believer. I used to be really old school. It was like print media, you know, like TV. We need to still have TV ads, you know, all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden I'm like, you know what? I'm believing that social media is the future. It's the now, and it's definitely the future. Yeah. So I need to get on board, and so we started to kind of form around that.
Sure.
And so then everything I was doing was promoting other people, right? Like I was saying, I've worked with everybody from fashion to restaurants to, you know, I've done my own events. We've done charity work. We've done, you know, different things. So we've worked with artists, you know. And then at some point I was like, well, what about me? Right? Like, what is my brand, right? Which I actually wrote a blog about early on, right? Why is an event brand manager writing about relationships? Well, it's because when I stepped back and I was like, what is my brand? Who am I? The two things that come to mind are coaching and relationships, because of all the different relationships that I'm in all the time. And I really believe that in business, in life, everything is relationships.
100%.
So, you know, like anybody who does good business, they have good relationships with people, right? And people come back to them because of that. Yeah. And so you could apply it to anything. And so I was like, you know what? And my partner that at the time, like my business partner, Kamar Burke, who we built the basketball academy with, and then, you know, now he's a videographer and we've still worked together in different ways. Yeah, he used to say to me for a long time, him and some other people that were in our circle would be like, man, if I was you, I'd be talking about relationships. Like, why aren't you yet? You know,
Yeah.
like you,
Yeah, yeah.
like we talk about all the time, and people come to you about that stuff all the time, but like you're not like putting it out there for people. And there was other people around that were just like, maybe you should write, or maybe you should do this, or whatever, you know. And I was like, so when I work with people, I always tell them find the medium that's best for you
Right.
to start with.
Sure.
So if it's video, do video. If it's writing, do writing. If it's audio, do audio. You know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And at that time for me, it was writing. So
Yeah.
that's why I wrote the book first.
Okay.
And then I decided to blog as like a preamble, you know.
Oh, interesting.
As the book was being edited or whatever, it was like, okay, so here's the jump off point for that to let people know that this is coming.
Right.
And so it was writing focused. And then now I decided, you know, I ventured into vlogging, as you've seen. And then the next step is podcast, because you just eventually you have to be on all the mediums, right?
Yeah.
You know, you got to reach everybody somehow, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Definitely.
So chocolate covered French fries, the podcast is coming soon.
Sick. Sick. Before we get into the podcast, which I'm actually quite curious about, I know a lot of people will also use their writing and blogging as also a form of expression for themselves whenever they feel any sort of inner turmoil. Is that also what it meant for you as well, or was that book what that meant for you as well? Any sort of ventilation?
Like the healing, you mean like
Yeah.
healing process in the book?
Yeah.
Yeah, it probably was. You
Yeah.
know, I think the blogging was definitely more so.
Mm-hmm.
The book, the way it took form was in those couple of years when I was going through that transition. So before I told you, I spent all those years working with people, like helping them get married and supporting families and stuff. And then,
Yeah.
and so people came to me in a different way at that time. And then when I went through the divorce and all the turmoil that we went through with the kids and all that stuff, people started coming to me in a different way, because all of a sudden, oh, look, Kevin's broken now, you know, and like everybody knows me, and in this town anyway. And in other cities too, like, you know, where I've lived before and stuff, they're like, whoa, like, okay, Kevin's vulnerable now, and
Yeah.
he's been through some shit. So now I can talk to him about the stuff that I've been through without like being, they're not afraid I'm going to judge them or anything like that, right?
Sure, yeah.
So everywhere I went, it was like, whoa, like, you know, like every second person is like, they've been through a divorce, or they've been through bankruptcy, or they've been, you know, whatever, like their kids have whatever, you know, like and it was just like, whew, you know?
Yeah.
And which is ironic, because when I first left that career, somebody I know does coaching online, right? Like health coaching in particular, and she does a really good job. She's pretty big, and she sat with me and she's like, you know what? I think you should consider doing this because I think you have the skill set and you have the background and you have the personality. But for men in particular, because men don't have a lot of places to go or other men that they can
Talk to. Yeah.
and there's a wider audience that you can reach, like by doing it online. And so we talked about the model. I still have all the notes, like I was putting together, like what a typical coaching program would look like, you know, like kind of thing for men, like 3 phases and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so someday that might come still. But at that time, because I was so devastated, I was like, this sounds cool, but I got nothing to give right now.
Right.
So then after all that time where people were coming to me, and I was like, it was healing for me too, because I was talking with them and helping with them, and we were sharing in our pain and stuff, and you know, within like discretion, right? Because I really think it's important not to tell other people's story, right?
Yeah.
So whether it be like my kids' stories or my ex-wife's story, and vice versa for other people, like let's keep it to us, like what I'm dealing with or what you're dealing with, you know, like kind
Sure.
of thing. Just like after a while, it was like I needed to start writing. I needed to start doing something, some kind of output with it, right?
Yeah.
And so when I made the decision to write the book, it happened in 6 weeks. Like the book is 6 chapters, really, plus an introduction and an epilogue, right? And
Yeah.
and it's literally like 1 week at a time, bam, just pumped it out. It just like came out. It was like one principle, another principle, another. So they're just principles to apply to any relationship.
Sure.
And that's how it came out. So that part wasn't as healing as it was practical.
Okay.
It was like, what would I suggest? What have I learned that I'm like, okay, this is one thing. If you employ this in your life, maybe it will help you, you know,
Right.
and then the next one and the next one, the next one,
Yeah.
you know, that kind of thing. And that's just how the book took form. And it was like after 6 weeks, it was like, boom, it's done.
Wow.
And I was like, okay. And I set a goal. I wanted it to be done by a certain time, sent it to my cousin who's a journalist in Toronto, and he started editing it.
Sick.
And it was just like, here we go.
Here we go.
Yeah.
And so what this all basically means as well is that through your explanation, this isn't a book specifically on romantic relationships.
No.
It is all sorts of different relationships.
Yeah, so that's why
Yeah.
the subtitle is a recipe for any relationship. And that in particular, because I noticed that like when I was looking it up, you know, I was kind of, because I always think it's important to like know who's out there in your space, right?
Yeah.
And when you look up relationships, typically you're going to find sex or dating.
Sure,
as,
yeah.
Like pop up right away, right?
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of people talking about just regular relationships, like
Right.
how to be a human being in a, you know, in that sense.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people doing a lot of like self-empowerment and personal development stuff.
Yeah.
Which is good. But then what about like the other part, like relating to other people, right? And so I feel like hopefully I could fill that.
Mm-hmm.
There is a community that's doing it, and I big ups to them. Like, and I shout out a lot of them in the book, and I reference them. You know, like some people that are really influential for me too, like their writings, like Esther Perel. I think I mentioned her first book. I think is huge for people. It's called Mating in Captivity. That was a big one for me when I read it.
Right.
People like Brene Brown. I talked about her in one of my vlogs. You know, like the Chapmans who gave us the 5 love languages.
Oh yeah, I've used the 5 love languages.
Yeah, so there's a community out there, and that's who I kind of see myself like connecting with more.
Yeah,
But-
100%.
But a lot of them are older now, like they've been at it for a while.
Right, yeah.
I'd hopefully be part of the new generation, right?
100%.
So I think like right now, I think one of the people that are doing it in this new space would be like Jay Shetty. You probably know Jay Shetty. I don't know, he's an East Indian guy
Okay.
too, right? And his
Yeah.
whole thing is so shout out Jay Shetty if you're listening to this thing. You know, I want to work with you. His thing is making wisdom go viral, and he's
Right.
pretty big time now. You know, and he's been like on Ellen, and like that sort of thing. Like once you get on Ellen, so Ellen, if you're listening,
Yo.
kind of thing. You know, we just like put each other on. You know, in that sense, and so I think there's a new generation coming up of people who are recognizing that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting and important to also vocalize, right? Because if you don't vocalize it, those people aren't going to hear it. And that's also a very key thing in relationships. My girlfriend and I, we've been dating for it's April now. So we're basically a little over a year now. And honestly, man, I love our little relationship that we have going on, right? And a lot of it, the most simple, if I could summarize it into one key thing, the key thing that I could predicate it on is basically just open communication, right? That's what seems to work for us. You know, I could be frustrated with her, she could be frustrated with me, but if I choose to stay quiet, which I tend to do a lot.
You're a dude. That's why.
Yeah. I just don't want to say some shit. But once I open up, it actually ends up being, it works out. It works out, right? Would you say that's like the bare bones thing about relationships? Is the key thing is communication?
Yes and no. So I think because when we talk about communication, we think automatically of verbal communication.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of ways that we communicate so yes, in a way, we have to find a way to communicate with each other, and it could be physical, it could be whatever, like kind of thing. But it's funny, like I mentioned Esther Perel in particular, or Esther, I don't know if I say her name right, but
right.
Because anyway, I think she's part of like a changing tide, and I do write about that in the book where I talk about this, and in that the sort of the older mentality, I don't like to use the word older, but like the traditional mentality is like if you go to counseling, you go to therapy or whatever, that you fix your communication, you're gonna fix everything else in your relationship, right? That's the traditional. And conflict resolution, like how to handle those sorts of things. And yes, those skills are important, but there's this new sort of trend that's happening that's suggesting that, well, we've been doing that for a long time and it's not necessarily always the best way, maybe.
Yeah.
And so what these new voices are starting to say, which I tend to fall into that too, is that maybe we need to fix other things first.
Right,
that
okay.
At the core, right? Like, fix is a tough word, but so maybe we need to focus on our intimacy a little bit more.
Yeah,
Now,
okay.
So I did a vlog recently, just a little snippet on intimacy, like scratching the surface. I said,
Right.
because when we think of intimacy, we always think of sex. Unfortunately, I think most people do, but that's not what I mean.
Right.
I mean intimacy, like the deepest parts of us, right? And so that has to do with, and I do write about that in the book too, where it has to do with giving and receiving. It has to do with how we receive the other person. It has to do with how we ask for things that we want, how we accept things from the other person, how we trust, how we dare to take risks, how we, like, all that is a totally different level, I think, than just communicating like what's on our mind or what's not, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And so they always say there's like multiple levels of communication, right? So there's like there's like facts, which you tell like, it's raining outside today,
Sure.
right? Like, kind of thing. So that affects my mood or whatever, like, kind of thing. And then there's opinions. So, and that's a deeper level. And then you get down to your feelings, right? Which most of us try to kind of avoid,
Yeah.
right? But it's on that level where I think we can do other things that are not just about talking.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so some people are really good at that. They're like, you know what, I'm like, right now I just want you to like be close with me.
Yeah.
Like, kind of thing, or
Yeah.
give me space.
Yeah.
Like, and respect that in the person, because that's what they need at the time. They don't need to talk. Right.
Right.
They don't, like, so anyway, that's probably like a long answer to what your question.
No, dude, we're on a podcast. You're supposed to give long answers. No, it's all good. And so the podcast you want to bring on, what exactly how is the format going to work on it? Is it sort of like you in an audio sort of form, just telling, hey, try this, try that? Or are you going to bring people in for them to talk about what their issues are and you sort of provide some sort of advice?
So the vision for the podcast that's coming is it's obviously going to be relationship focused, right?
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of trying to find a co-host, like the right co-host, because
Sure.
I don't want to do it alone. And I want it to be like a mix. So it'll be like talking about current trends and things that are going on in the world and media and stuff like that too. But then also like real stuff as well. That's just like tough stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so it'll be a mixture of, sometimes maybe it'll just be us talking about stuff that's going on. And then we bring in, because with two voices, that's a lot already. But I'd also like to definitely interview some people that are maybe doing stuff in that area or like specialize in something or whatever. But I want it to be, I don't want it to be too heavy. And that's one of the reasons why I want to bring a co-host on, is because I feel like I'm more the guy that, because I'm all my big background in this area, that is going to talk about, like, look at how long my last answer was to you, right?
Hey,
like,
it's
kind
all
of
good.
It's
all good.
So I need somebody on the other side who's like lighten it up a little bit. That's
Sure,
going to help
yeah.
me. And I'm looking for a female co-host that, like, I have somebody in mind, and but we'll see.
Well, it's important, right? You want to, like, having a balance of a woman and a man talking about relationships. I feel like you can't just do it with one or the other, and also different orientations as well, if that's something that you're open to as well, right? Because even though it's not solely based on a romantic relationship podcast, I'm sure you have various other styles as well, but I'm sure you're going to do your best to keep it as balanced as possible, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and especially I think the female perspective. I mean, yeah, we're living in a time right now where there's huge like female empowerment and lots going on in that area.
Yeah.
But there is definitely a need for both sides.
100%. Yeah.
And so there's a lot, like, I'm going to be talking from a man's perspective. And I talk about this, with my sons. Like, I just had this conversation with my youngest son.
Yeah.
The other day I was saying, like, he's just turning 12.
Right.
And I'm like, you're just getting to that point where you're gonna, we're gonna need to talk about some stuff, right?
Sure, yeah.
And no matter what, like, I'm really the only person in your family right now that you could talk to about it, other than his brother probably, like, kind of thing. But like, in terms of as a man, like an adult, just his mom or his sisters, they can't understand what it's like to be a growing boy, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just something you can't, and vice versa. Like, I understand, like, I have 4 daughters, And so I know a lot about women and a lot about women's health. You know, I was married, obviously, and I worked with women a lot, and I was raised by my mom and stuff like that mostly, you know. But at the end of the day, I'm not a woman, right?
No, of course,
I can't really understand, you know. So there's beauty in that, right? Like to have both sides for sure.
Yeah. Is it stressful for you to talk about them growing into that age?
Like the girls growing up.
No, I mean
Or
like the
kids?
guys. Actually, that's interesting. 2-part question here. Are you do you get stressed out or anything when you talk to, like, say, your 12-year-old son about getting into that age and what's going to be different? And was it stressful for you to see your daughters grow into that age?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's nothing more stressful. I tell you, you know,
Yeah.
I'm a pretty chill guy. Like most people see me as like super laid back.
Yeah.
You know, but I tell you, I worry about different things on different sides. Obviously, you know, like, and having 4 daughters, like. I was definitely like, I don't know if you've seen Bad Boys 2, but that scene where Martin and Will Smith, like when the guy comes to pick up his daughter, I wanted to do that with all my daughters when their first guy comes to the door, you know, like kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you know, they're always like, you know, it's typical, like, don't embarrass me. Like they don't want, they're afraid to tell me, you know, about those things because they don't want me to be overprotective and stuff.
No, of course they want their independence. Like that is peak age. Like your
Yeah.
16-year-old daughter, that is peak age right there.
It's tough, you know. So like, it's a real hard thing to like let them know that I care and that I am protective. Like that's who I am. That's who I should be. I'm their dad.
Of course, yeah.
But and also because I'm a guy and because I know like when I was that age, I mean like what I was thinking about most of the time, and I'm like realistically, like when I see any guys rolling up to talk to my daughters, I'm like, I know what you're thinking. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, you know, it's like, stop thinking like that. You know, like kind of thing. And so there's both sides, right, in that way. And it's the same with my sons because. Like I've always, even though, you know, like maybe I wasn't the best husband, you know, to their mom or whatever. And so I definitely take responsibility for a lot of that stuff. And we've had to work through a lot of that stuff. But my hope has always been like in my conversations with my boys is to try and be somewhat of a decent man, you know, like, and when you have relationships, like to be honest, to stand up as much as you can be, and, you know, and to go back to what we were talking about before, like porn was a huge problem for me when I was growing up, most of my life. And I think it's an epidemic right now, a little bit in our culture, because it's encouraged for boys and for men in general, and even for girls now. But it totally messes up how real life works. And how
100%.
relationships work.
Yeah.
And for men in particular, it teaches us to that like women are there for us and for like our pleasure and for, you know, like kind of thing. And it's just poison, I think, right? And so I always worried about that, especially now with the access that everybody has to everything on their phones, on their whatever, you know. So yeah, I'm stressed all the time. But like I wear this Serenity ring on. That's my thing, you know. And he took a picture of my hand, and I make sure I keep my ring on because it's the only real ring I wear right now. And it's that Serenity prayer, you know. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I talk about that in chapter 1 of my book. I say that's rule number 1 is it's all about you. It's all about me. And so the detachment that I've had to practice or I've had to learn is that as much as I'm stressed and I'm worried about my kids all the time, I don't have control over certain things. You know, I can't be there all the time. I can't, you know, and I can't make their decisions for them as much as I would love to put them in a box. Yeah. You know, like kind of thing. And so at the end of the day, if they make a bad decision, like I did maybe when I was that age,
I think it's natural, man. Natural to make bad decisions.
And it's like I have to somehow let go of that, like that anxiety or that worry about that, you know, like kind of thing. And so that's been the lesson for me, is to just be able to somehow just be like, okay, it's not about me. I try to give them as much as I can to make good decisions up to now, you know?
Yeah, of course. Of course. I mean, it's just like that old cliche, you know, if you love it, you gotta let it go, you know, that sort of thing. But no, it's definitely true in that regard. But have you listened to Kanye's album Ye?
Not much. I tell you, I have a love-hate relationship with Kanye. I think he's brilliant in terms of how he puts music together, but some of his stuff, like it's like this whole new culture that we were talking about, with music, like and social media and everything like that. I'm just like, like that one hit that came out recently,
Oh, I know.
You're such a,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm like, really? Like that is everybody's just like bopping to it and loud so loud. I'm like, oh, it's so bad. Like the words are so bad.
But you would have loved it, I'm sure. If you were my age or like you're any one of your kids' age and that song came out, I'm sure you would have bumped it, man.
Yeah, it's the thing is like the beats are always so good and the vibe is good. It's just like when you listen to the lyrics,
it's super catchy, but the lyrics, you'll just be like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
You literally never say that to anybody.
It's true.
Right?
It's like, I don't know. It's just, so that's my problem with this new genre of music. We talk about brand management and some of the stuff I've done and that I do artist development, and I was gonna launch a record label and it's still on the back burner, still thinking about what that might look like.
Yeah.
And I'm still doing that kind of work. But the new genre that's coming up, like obviously I'm a hip hop and R&B guy.
Yeah.
And I'm not a huge fan,
Right.
Yes, I come from like the Jay-Z, Nas era, like that kind of thing, and I come from
Golden Age.
come from the East, right? So there's a lot more of that, right? Like back then, and it's like now, like it's funny I bring up Kamar again. Like him and I, we had lots of road trips together. We always end up talking about Drizzy at some point, like Drake, and we're like. When you listen to Drake's songs, like there's so many lyrics, like he's telling his story, like a lot of his time. You get to know him, like and none of the bars are the same really, except for the hook. But you listen to some of this new stuff that's coming out, like they literally have like one verse and they just repeat it over and over. Like a lot of this is the same thing. There's not much content there, right?
Right.
And so that's hard for me, with that because that I think it lacks maybe some of the poetry that used to be there.
Yeah.
Right? But we still have some of it. I mean, there's still like J. Cole and Kendrick and Chance and people like that are holding it down, and I really think like shout out Tion Gibbs because, he's part of our circle too. And he's doing, I think like for the West, he's the guy that we believe that could put the West on finally.
I think Tion's really got it going, man.
He's the same kind of thing. Like he's got that. Like he's got lots of content and it's good stuff, right?
He's to me the West Coast Drake for sure.
For sure, yeah.
That's what I think about Tion Gibbs.
Yeah. He's fam, so I ain't mad about it, right?
Yeah, 100%. And by the way, the reason why I wanted to bring up Ye, that specific album, is the very last song. It's about the way that Kanye feels about his daughters growing up.
Okay.
And so I wanted to know what you thought about it, but if you hadn't had a chance to listen to it, I'm not going to get into it.
No, I'll go give it a listen.
Yeah, I want to know if you find what he says to be relatable.
Okay.
He talks about how he knows what dudes at that age want, and he's talking about how he's like, just don't do yoga, don't do Pilates, just stick to karate, like that kind of stuff. He wants his daughters to stay small and everything like that because he knows like what Kim Kardashian was all about back in the day. So so he's like, don't be like your mom, be more like me, just draped in like these big clothes, but
yeah. No, it's funny that you mentioned that because there's a Drake track on, I think it's on Scorpion. I'm pretty sure it's on Scorpion.
Yeah.
I think it's more March 14th. I don't know if you've listened to much of that album.
I haven't had a chance, no.
So I'm pretty sure it's that song. And Drake also talks about his parents and like now that he's a parent, same kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, he talks about how like he used to call out his parents a lot, like in his early music in particular. Yeah. Like kind of like bashing them a little bit, like for like where they made mistakes and stuff like that. And then now that he's a father, he's like, damn, I get it. Shoot, like he's like, I never wanted it to be like that. And I'm very much that way. I'm like, I probably stayed married as long as I did because I was so set at one point where I was like, I'm not going to be like my parents. I grew up, my parents were divorced, right? And I'm like, I didn't want that for my kids, because I seen what it was like. Yeah. And so Drake was basically saying the same thing. He's like, I knew I didn't want that and I hated on my parents for it. And then look at me now. I'm like, shoot, now I'm co-parenting, like kind of thing. But life happens and you just gotta roll with it. You gotta make the best of it. Right.
Right. Definitely. when you were growing up, did you have like a lot of you don't have to delve into it too much, but like did you have a lot of like girlfriends growing up? Like what I'm trying to get at is, was it different to break up from a marriage versus like how different did it feel to break up from a marriage versus like breaking up with just a girlfriend?
Well, I did a lot really young. Like I was really ahead of my time. That's why I had a kid so young, I
Sure.
believe, and so
Yeah.
I don't ever recommend it. Like in our culture, we call it force rape.
Okay.
That's the word, like in the Caribbean, right? And it's like you're like trying to be ahead of your time, like,
Oh, sure.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that was definitely me. And so I definitely had a lot of relationships when I was in high school, way ahead of my time. But no, it's very different breaking up in a marriage, 100%. Like, it's,
Right. What's
and
it like,
especially
man?
when you have kids, right? That's the hardest part, I think,
Yeah.
for me. But our situation, I think, was better. I mean, just we'll quickly rewind to like our generation when I was in high school. I believe that we had so many relationships at that time because the culture was different. Like,
Oh, dude,
it
yeah.
was like it was very much that culture. Like when you look at the music in the '90s, it was like baby making music. Everything was like Jodeci, Mary J. Blige, like R. Kelly. Like, I mean, R. Kelly is R. Kelly, but like, but still he was, like,
Well, aside from all that bullshit, yeah.
But yeah, the music was all about that, like H Town, like knocking the boots, like that was the culture, right? And so now, I think that's eased up a little bit, and there's maybe more encouragement for kids to be kids longer a little bit. But anyway, I know that kids are still doing stuff younger than ever too, right? So regardless, but yeah, in a marriage, it's totally different when you're an adult and you have so many things tied together too. In my situation, I'm blessed. Like I'm really grateful for my ex-wife in that sense. Like we've been on the same page as much as it was hard, like to do what was best for the family. So there was no lawyers for us. There was, like no fighting over stuff, like we custody, all that kind of stuff. Like we just, we basically talked it through as hard as it was. And we're like, okay, right now, this is the best situation for us. And
Sure.
we'll revisit it when we need to and whatever,
Yeah.
And so, that being said, it's still way harder. It's just, you start to build a life that, you don't do that when you're dating typically.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I've been through like a really intense breakup. That's what kind of caused like this extreme turning point in my life in 2015. Just a girl that was basically my, at the time, high school sweetheart, right? We've been dating for 5 years. We broke up in like this terrible way, not amicable in any sort of way. We basically went from like being 5 years together to never speaking again, like that sort of situation.
That's tough.
It was fucked, man. It was
Yeah.
terrible. But anyway, I just never want to experience anything like that again, It definitely did me for the better though. Like I turned out to be much more of I have a stronger sense of alignment with myself because of it, right? And I've grown a lot of love for things that I previously never had love for in such a strong and passionate way. But yeah, no, I just can't imagine right now, aside from like my parents dying and my family members being all whatever, like if I were to choose to marry my current girlfriend and then we end up having a family and all that stuff, and then I come to find that we end up getting a divorce like 20 years later, that to me sounds so awful.
Yeah.
But nobody wants to experience anything like that at all.
I mean, in the same breath, you're always different. So like you say, like every 7 years, you have to reinvent yourself and your relationship, like in whatever relationship you're in, because you change. You're not the same person that you were then. So, if you go in different directions, it's not necessarily the end of the world because you're different people than you were when you started. But I honestly, like what you were talking about before, one, I see the trend now, and I've been through it, where breakups often lead to this whole like self-development stuff, right? Like, which I don't think was the case so much when I was younger.
Yeah.
There's a huge focus for that now. It's like, get to know yourself more, be good with yourself, which is really healthy.
Yeah.
For one, which we should be doing before we, it shouldn't be a breakup that makes us have to go through that, right?
Yeah.
The other side of it is that, when the different dynamic, like when you're talking about when you went through that big breakup, in that situation, you can walk away and like not talk to each other and not need to talk to each other. But when you're married and you have kids in particular, you still have to be in relationship with each other because you're always connected by those kids that you have, right? And so it's a totally different dynamic, right? So if you burn that bridge, and that's why I'm always amazed. Like I've seen so many people I know that have gone through divorce, and it's ugly.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, and I've even talked to some of my like fellow men that have gone through it, you know, at the time, and I'm like, bro, like you could make this better, you know, like if you just stop fighting, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like in the end of the day, like you two are going to be in each other's lives for as long as those kids are around, you know, for the most part, at least until they're adults. And like you're going to make each other's lives hell, or you could choose to work together in some way, right? And so if you don't have kids, like you could walk away from your relationship and never see that person again, right? Like kind of thing. So yeah, they both have their ups and downs. They're just different, right?
100%. Honestly, that talking about that just stresses me out. God damn.
That's the thing. Relationships aren't easy, but they're real, right? Like that's why I wanted to do what I'm doing, right?
Yeah, no, that's wonderful that we have like that. Have you for that, you know, because in the lens that I'm looking at right now, I don't see anybody else in my vision that's able to do that. And if that's the case for me, that will be the case for other people too, right? So it's very, very cool that we have that here locally for you, man. Because the thing about brand development and relationship building, romantic or otherwise, is actually they're very similar in principle, aren't they? Right?
Yeah. I mean, because number one, I always say is knowing who you are, right?
Yeah.
And we were talking about that with brand identity, because that's how I see myself. Like with my business, I always say, like, I'm not a traditional consultant, because traditional consultants tend to look just at money, right? Like, how can you be more profitable, which is important. And then traditional marketers tend to look at just like the aesthetics, like, well, you know, like how do you look to the world, and what does your logo look like, and blah, 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 which is also important. But I'm more interested. I think the new space is all about identity, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why I was, you know, like some of the meetings I was telling you I had this week and stuff was about other opportunities where I could teach on that, you know, as well, because I think that that's the new way, right? And there's actually only one school I think I've found so far in Western Canada that offers courses or like a program in brand management, because it's a new thing, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, going back to what you were saying, is that the principles are often pretty similar. So I always say the first part is knowing who you are. And if you don't know who you are, you got to get to know who you are. You got to figure out who you are. And in some cases, so like, let's take the music industry, for example, because we're both involved in that in some way. You know, they say in the music industry, you either have to be believable or like be authentic, or you have to make people believe. Like you have to choose one or the other. And some people take the second route. They're like, you know what? I want to be a country musician, and their background's not country,
right?
But they just put it on. They start wearing the clothes, they start talking the talk, walking the walk, and people start to believe them. You know what I mean? Like kind of thing. And so that's who it is. And so when you're building a brand, you have to make a decision. It's either who you are already, or who you want to be, or like what you at least like for either the purposes of what it is that you're trying to achieve. And you know, which I don't recommend. I don't recommend being something you're not. Yeah. Unless it's like within your scope, right?
100%. Yeah. Because people will see right through that, man.
Yeah. You know, unless you're making that change for a reason. You know, like I think, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure, like, so take Alicia Keys is one of my favorite artists. And when she first came out, she came out with a different name, right? Yeah. And then like a lot of people didn't know her at first. And then she kind of went away for a little while, and she came back as Alicia Keys. And she was, you know, like, and boom, she hit us with Fallen, right? That big hit. Yeah. Just like different look or whatever kind of thing. And and it's like, which I think is more her probably now, you know, like in that sense. So it wasn't a stretch, right? Like in that way.
Right. That's right. And you know, when it comes to like choosing whether you want to do like, you know, be yourself authentically or go into something else, right? It really depends on what your trajectory is, and sort of like what the reasoning behind it is, right? Like, for example, the biggest song in the world right now, you can probably guess what it is, Lil Nas X. Yeah, and like Old Town Road, like, dude's not a country singer at all, but he's got literally the number one country song in the world right now. Number one song in the world right now, period, with Billy Ray Cyrus. And the thing about it, man, is that trolling is like one of the biggest marketing things out there right now, because like outrage is one of the biggest ways for news to be spread. It's literally like fire.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's an insane thing that we never had in the 20th century before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, definitely this new era that we're living in is totally different, and that's one of the things about, like, I think most of my clients, which is kind of a little bit off of what we're talking about.
Sure.
Like a lot of the people that I end up working with, or want to talk to me are people who have built businesses and who don't like this new era, because when they started in business, it wasn't around. Like they don't understand the new social media and stuff like that, and they don't want to take the time to do that. And honestly, as a brand manager, like every week, probably at least once a week, I'm like, I wish I could just shut off my social media, like like you just did, like kind of thing. Shut it off for like a week. I don't want to be on it, it's just so much, right? But I have to be relevant. It's part of our job is to be relevant in the space, and so that means being consistent, right? Like out there in that sense. And so it's just like it's this necessary evil that we have to do, and if we want to exist in that space, right? And so, yeah, it's a new day, that's for sure.
Silence is incredibly important. It catches people completely off guard. And you know what? Use that to your advantage. People will think that, you're right. Being relevant is definitely part of our job. But when you have complete silence, people notice. I've had people tell me in person that they've noticed that I don't upload anything anymore. That's important, because you know why? You know why it works for Kendrick to like not say anything at all ever, and then he drops an album and everybody freaks out? Because it's exciting. When you do something really great and then you disappear. Like, this doesn't work for everybody, of course, but I just love that strategy. It's something that I've always admired. And J. Cole, for example, he was completely silent all the time, and now he's everywhere, right? Like social media, he's just talking about stuff all the time. And I'm just like, man, it's like all eyes are on him now, because it was such a rarity for him to do that. I think silence is incredible. And I think it's a tool that more people should actually utilize.
Yeah, one of the books I'm reading right now is called The Power of Silence. And, it's true. I agree. And there's so many sayings about it. It's like silence is the sound of someone becoming golden, right? Like kind of thing. Or or a person becoming whole, or, all those sorts of things, right? Like, I was saying the last podcast that I did was that one of the pieces of advice I always got was listen more than you talk, right? And that means that we got to be quiet, right? In that sense, because we have two ears and we have one mouth, right? So God designed us that way for a reason. So no, I agree, the same thing. And I went through a period where I was laying low for a while, and a lot of people actually thought I left. They just thought I moved away or whatever.
Right.
And it was because I was doing a lot of soul work and and that sort of thing. And I just didn't have it in me to be around people and be posting and be whatever. And then all of a sudden I'm back. People are like, whoa, are you like Frank Ocean? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Oh, that's another example right there, man. Frank disappeared.
Yeah. Actually, I was watching Dave Chappelle's last show the other day on Netflix, and he was like, I was filming my last. He's like, so this is the last one, and then y'all gotta wait, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like, but it's true. It's waiting can be important, right?
Yeah.
But in our culture, because we're so used to getting everything
right away
now, it's like, we don't want to wait. We'll often go on to something else, and then maybe we'll come back and we'll look, this person's back. We'll go like this. And with this whole binge watching culture that we have now too, I find that too. I'm like, oh well, I've gotten through a show on Netflix. Like, I don't want to wait for the next season, so I'm gonna find another show to watch in the meantime. You know what I mean? And that's kind of how our world is now. But but it's still important. We need to take those. I used to call them the spaces in between, right?
Yeah. That's important.
There was this famous writer that I used to tell the story of that. she used to send people letters, but back when people used typewriters,
Yeah.
and with no spaces in the words, and on purpose, and it would take them like weeks, months to figure out what the heck this letter said, right?
Yeah.
And it's just because without the breaks, you can't make sense of things. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so we need that in all parts of our life, right?
Right. And that's, I have no idea who said this quote. I feel like George Clinton of Funkadelic said this, but but somebody in that realm said music is all the space in between all the notes, right? And I'm just like, that makes a lot of sense. It's incredible, man. Like, it's incredible to think about negative space, whether it be in a picture or music or whatever, to be used as a tool to create different things and different meanings and expressions. I love it. I love it when people do, in a literal or figurative way, think outside the box, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
No, but that, I can't remember who it was either that was talking about like what defines a room, right? Is the space, right? Like it's like when you walk, it's the emptiness that's in a room that defines how you can use it, right? Like kind of thing. And so that is an interesting concept to me. It's the same sort of thing, right? It's like, and I think, musically you can find, because I'm a musician too, right? So it could be the same thing. And I used to be very particular about that. I was like, when I was working with a band or whatever, I'd be like, there has to be dynamics. Like we can't just always be the same throughout. There's got to be some breaks. There's got to be some highs, some lows, some like whatever. So
yeah, exactly. One thing I wanted to ask you about music is that like you talked earlier about how you don't care about today's music because it's all about like drugs and sex and blah blah blah. But dude, didn't you experience that same thing when you were in your youth in the 90s? Like that's literally what people in your age group currently, but back then, were complaining about with rap music, man. That's why we have those parent advisory stickers. Didn't you think that like Biggie was so sick and Tupac was awesome and like A Tribe Called Quest and all those guys were just amazing and they were talking about that kind of stuff back then too. What's the difference?
I mean, first of all, props to you for knowing all those guys, like at your age, but yeah, I mean, there was drugs was always a part of the culture and that sort of thing. I think in our time, though, it wasn't as big. Like it was, like weed was probably the biggest thing, like kind of at that time, sure, there was other stuff floating around at that time, and like acid was big when I was young and stuff like that, and like there was always like, that was just the rise of things like cocaine and stuff like that at that time, right? And so you have people like Biggie saying things like "Don't get high on your own supply," which is great advice, like stuff like that, right?
Ice Cube said that too,
you know. But I feel like the music that I grew up on was like the stuff that I listened to was not so much focused on that. Like it was, like yes, all of a sudden we had like the surgence of like NWA and stuff like that, which brought us like gangster rap and stuff.
Yeah.
But I was always more like an R&B guy or like a conscious rap guy. So like guys like Tribe and even like the Roots, but like more like Wu-Tang, but like when it comes to R&B, I was more like my stuff was, and funny, my son, when you interviewed him, he talked about that, like growing up, like he mentioned like Chris Brown and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because they were the new generation. Like I really believe that whole Cash Money, like they changed the game, like Lil Wayne, Nicki, Drake, Chris, But before that, it was like I grew up on like Babyface, like Usher,
right?
Like
3 6 Mafia. Did you like them?
Yeah, there are like Locks and like all those guys, like that whole like Bad Boy era. I used to dance too, right? So I used to do choreography and stuff, and so like one of the first pieces that we used to travel and perform was like Mo Money, Mo Problems, that kind of thing. It was the music video era, right?
Yeah.
So I grew up on that kind of stuff, like Janet Jackson, Michael Jackson, like and whatever. So the music I feel was a little different. It tended to be more about relationships, I think, like about love and about
I remember R&B back in the day, man. It was really about making your girl feel like good. I definitely remember that, like back in the day.
But you had people like TLC was way ahead of their time, I think. You know, people like them, like even like Salt and Pepper, like they were like TLC's like don't go chasing waterfalls, stick to the rivers that you used to, like that kind of thing, like that is great advice, you know what
Yeah.
mean? It's like you know, when they're talking about creeps and like I don't want, you know, like I don't want no creeps and things like that.
Right,
you know, like
right.
they're speaking wisdom out there. I
Yeah.
was surprised, you know. Like,
Yeah, definitely.
like,
Definitely.
So yeah, it was just a different era, you know, I think. And so now I just hear like I feel like almost every song is about like this whole new era of like all these millions of pills that are out there and stuff and whatever. And like every song is like about Xan and Percocet and whatever, you know, and so I don't care for it that much. So,
Yeah,
you know,
it's not relatable. I understand. There's a lot of songs out there that to me do sound really run of the mill, man. Like a lot, I could like dime a dozen, no problem. But there are some songs though that really do stand out to me. Like I genuinely think Lil Pump makes amazing music.
Really?
Yeah, totally, man. Like, and don't get me wrong here. Like, To Pimp a Butterfly is my favorite album of the decade by far. I think it's my favorite record ever, and Kendrick Lamar is an absolute genius for making it. And my favorite song off that album is How Much a Dollar Cost. Have you heard that song before?
No, I haven't listened to it.
It's about Kendrick meeting a homeless man. Kendrick pulls up in this luxury car, and this homeless man asks for just for like 1 rand, right? Or 10 rand. And Kendrick's like, no, that's literally like $1, but he's like, no. And then they end up getting into a face-off. And at the end of the song, the kicker is it turns out to be a test of God. Basically what happens is that homeless man actually ends up being God, and he says, you know how much that dollar cost? The price of your heaven, the price for your spot in heaven, now embrace your lost. And I'm like, holy shit. It completely blew my mind.
Yeah.
And I get shivers every time I hear it. It's the most incredible thing. And man, I love that song. I am not Christian or anything. I wasn't brought up that way, but like my respect for what he has to say in that album and that song in particular, it's completely astounding. But back to Lil Pump, I genuinely love his music. It's so much fun and incredibly exciting. I think there's absolute value in both different places, but it really just depends on like where you want to come from and where you want to go. You know?
But you know, like for me, like honestly, in that genre right now, if I had to pick somebody, I'd probably say Lil Skies is I like his stuff. You know, like but like for one, I'm just like, how many Lils are there? There's like, you know, Lil Baby, Lil Skies, Lil Pump, Lil this, Lil that, you know, like kind of thing. And so but I don't really, you know, I don't follow. There's that guy that sings that track Swervin'. That's a good one out right now. Yeah, you know, like he has 2 tracks out right now. I like him. I really liked 21 Savage when he came out. I like his vibe. I don't think, you know, like so there's some of them in this new generation that I get down with, but I'm still an R&B guy. So like we talk about the music that's coming out now. The stuff that I'm more likely to listen to is like Khalid,
right?
And like, you know, and like
The Weeknd or something.
Yeah, well, The Weeknd always, but like and being a Toronto boy, it's like EXO, OVO, like, you know. But like people like her, like,
her's so good.
Like
She's great.
Like LMA, like you know, like there's like all these new R&B artists, SZA Blue, she was, you know, like, so that's more like where I spend most of my time listening, you know.
Yeah, I saw SZA live, by the way, man.
Really?
She's so good live. I've seen Kendrick 3 times at this point. And the last time I saw him was at this championship tour where they had every single TDE person there, including Schoolboy Q. And Kendrick headlined, of course, but SZA totally took the show, in my opinion. She blew it away, man.
Wow, that's great. I like Danny Lee too. She's just coming up, you know, it's on Lil Baby, and she's got this track called Be Yourself. I definitely recommend it. She's just starting to kind of like low key, you know. Like I'm a huge fan of people that are like not so commercial, like you know, like Russ, like the rapper. He's I really like his stuff, you know. He's just been like steady making tracks, you know. He's out there, so people like that. So I still kind of go back and forth with my hip hop, but I'm always leaning more to R&B, right? And that's the kind of stuff, like when I do artist development, I'm more interested in like in R&B, like singer songwriters, or you know, like a little less, like, you know, like I love, like we mentioned Tion before, you know, like he does both, and you know, and in terms of like the hip hop that he does, like I really get down with it, you know, in that sense, but there's not a lot out there that I think, you know, in this, just for me, right?
Yeah, no, that's fair, man. It's basically all about sort of appealing to a person's just most primal instincts and feelings, right? Just sort of that good time all the time kind of thing, you know, back in the day. It's kind of like that again, but just sort of catered to and marketed in a way that's appealing for people that are younger, right? Like all of these trends are basically just repeating themselves. All of this stuff is just repeats of themselves. Like this is an absolute repeat of, say, punk music back in the day, you know? I'm not the first person to obviously say that kind of thing, but like this rebellious attitude, like back in the day, punk was rebelling against rock music back in the day. Like they were rebelling against like Zeppelin and the Doors and all that kind of stuff because it was old and boring. Everybody's heard that stuff. So of course these kids on SoundCloud are going to make music that's louder, heavier, more aggressive and in your face. And people are going to want to jump to that. And, yeah, girls want to get into that. And of course, if the girls go in, the guys want to follow. And it's just sort of what the way is. And I think it's natural for people that are in other generations, aside from like the youngest ones, to really understand or even want to give a shit about it in the first place.
Yeah, I think you hit a good point. Like in every generation, there's always that like push pull.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And in any industry, in any, you know, whatever, like I was having this conversation with somebody in the media industry the other day.
Yeah.
And it was the same thing. It's like, one of the sayings in business is innovate or die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And so you could apply that to anything, relationships, you know, your brand, whatever it is. And music, same thing, right? It's like if music doesn't change or evolve, it can't just stay the same all the time, right? Like,
right.
And so there's always something growing, and that, you know, you mentioned like kind of that rock sort of like punk like sort of thing. I definitely had an appreciation for that growing up in the 90s, like Guns N' Roses, like Chili Peppers, stuff like that, you know. My cousin back home in Toronto area, he has a band called Breaching Vista. The shout out to them. I definitely think go check them out. They're on all the platforms too. They've had some pretty good success. I think they're legit. And they're doing it. They've been doing it for a while, you know. And so I have appreciation for all types of music, you know. And I think we need to always be diverse. And like you mentioned that crossover before, you know, with that big country song now and all that, like Billy Ray Cyrus and all that. And I think we could apply those principles to anything, you know. It's like we're living in an era now where it's easier to collaborate with more people in anything. I mean, look at us. Like we're like, technically we're a generation apart.
Yeah.
You know, and you're still in, you know, in school partially, you know, and just starting out. I've already had a family. I've already, you know, like done a lot of things that you're still probably gonna do. And here we are collaborating, you know, like kind of thing. And it's just a perfect example, right?
Yeah. Well, I genuinely find it interesting to talk to you,
yeah.
right? Because the thing is, I love talking to people that are in the same age group as me, right? I do it all the time. But to talk to somebody in a one-on-one situation, the same way I would talk to somebody my age, is just refreshing rather than like a hello, sir, yes, ma'am kind of situation. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it just sort of makes me feel, I just sort of feel like I'm expanding myself by doing that. And that's the point of actually the show that I'm doing here in the first place. It's not supposed to be just a hip hop show or anything. It's all about expanding myself.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I always tell people, like, expand your circle for sure. Like your circle, you hear these things all the time. It's like, you know, show me who you spend time with, I'll tell you who you are kind of thing, right? And I always tell people, like, if you know, that saying is true. Like when you hear people saying it all the time, like on YouTube and all these people talking about personal development, they're always saying, you know, if the people that you're surrounded with are not better than you or are, you know, don't challenge you or whatever, then you're in the wrong circle, you know, in that sense.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm grateful I have more than one circle, you know, like kind of thing. Everybody needs a mastermind circle, they say, right? And I feel like I have more than one of that, you know, like kind of thing. And I always try to make sure, like, the people that are around me, they, like, we're all better than each other in certain areas. Like, we're all specialists probably in our own rights,
right? But
we're equal still in a sense. So we're able to challenge each other, you know, like, and kind of call each other to account, or, you know, and it's all done in love. And so I've seen other people who are trying to be successful that I know that purposely maybe surround themselves with people that are not like that. Like, you know, like people who would follow them, maybe, for example, right? And they're not going to grow in that way. Like, the people are always going to be looking to them to be their leader, and that's it. You know, like kind of thing. So Yeah, I think you got the right attitude, and I think that we need that in everything, in anything in our life. Is that I always think mentorship is really important. That's why coaching for me is such a big thing.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
in sports and life and business is that like I've had many mentors in my life that are even just outside of my circle. Like I will seek out people. Like when I was going through my big transition in life, like with my relationship and my career and all that, I sought out a few people that I knew. Like I didn't really have that close a relationship with them, but I was like, hey, would you have coffee with me like once a week for a little while? Like so I could just bounce some stuff off you because I know you've been successful or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're like, sure. You know, like people, they're happy. People like that are usually happy to like genuinely share because people, you value what they've done, right?
100%.
Like, kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, so anybody who's listening, get a mentor or find multiple mentors or get a circle that challenges you.
100%. Expand yourself as an individual. It's incredibly important to do so. I feel like I personally draw a lot of parallels to expanding yourself through food, right? I try my best not to be a picky eater at all. And I'm actually quite open-minded. I have been a vegetarian from the age of 12 to 24. I'm not 24 anymore. I'm now fully omnivorous. I'll eat whatever I want. And so I'm trying all sorts of new stuff. I've never eaten sea urchin before, but I had it on my birthday. It was honestly so good. I love that. It was so good.
Wow.
Yeah, so I try to throw that parallel into all the different facets of my life as much as I can. So if I'm able to eat like all sorts of different things, I can apply that same principle to everything else. And I think it's really healthy for people to want to do that as well, right? Like as long as you're comfortable with it, but even not, just fuck it, just go for it. Like what do you have to lose? Come on.
Yeah, I'm probably a little more cautious, but you know, at my age now, I've come to just figure out what agrees with me and what doesn't.
Sure, yeah.
I was having this conversation with somebody the other day who was talking to their kids. We were talking about how like because they were making the choice to go vegan, and they're trying to make their kids go vegan too, right? And like, you know, we were just having the discussion that, like, at the end of the day, eventually people are going to choose their own path.
Yeah.
And the same thing applies to, like, spirituality and all those sorts of things. Like, you know, like, we as parents or whatever want to kind of shape our kids as much as possible. And because we want what's best for them, what we think is best for them at that time, right?
Right.
And so eventually we choose our own path. And for me, like the way I used to eat when I was young compared to how I choose to eat now, like it's still not maybe as ideal as I should or would like it to be, but it's light years from the way I used to abuse my body before, right? Like, so I've definitely, you know, I make that, and that's it, for me is expanding. It's like, okay, like stuff that I would have never touched before because I'm like, that sounds gross, or it's healthy. It's just like, you know, like it's gonna taste like dirt, you know, like kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
But now it's like I'm feeding my body fuel. It's a different mentality, right?
Of course. And the thing about for me is like, I use it as like a form of practicing self-discipline too, because I think to myself, like Steve Jobs did this, for example, right? I love reading biographies and I loved his. And for me, he used this principle of, if you eat stuff that's incredibly plain, stuff that's just really not fun to eat at all, it allows you to experience on a more multi-dimensional way when you do eat something wonderful, right? So like eating just plain bread with literally nothing on there, to, for example, if you're tracking your calories and stuff, just to hit those calories, and then on your off day or cheat day when you finally have like a piece of cheesecake, it's the best fucking cheesecake in your life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I like to apply those kinds of principles because like those dynamics make life far more interesting in my experience.
Yeah. Well, and it's in a way it's a form of fasting, right? It's kind of like what we were talking about before, like the silence, and it's the same with our body. And in one of the podcasts I did recently, I talked about, like, for me, I read this book at a particular time that was about the spirituality of fasting and a lost tradition in our culture. And it was like not just fasting from food, but like sometimes it's like unplugging, or it's, you know, being alone or whatever it is.
Oh, yeah.
and it's good, you know, like we're so inundated, we have so much options, we have, so, you know, like going to the grocery store, you've got like 50 different cereals you could choose from, right? Like,
Yeah.
so to have that time, like where we choose disciplines like that, where we just, you know, and like for me right now, like, because I still, for the most part, I still choose to worship as a Catholic. I always
Sure.
say, like, my spirituality is broad, I think, you
Sure.
know, but like when I go to worship, that's what I do. And so this time of year, we're in Lent.
Mm-hmm.
And so in Lent is 40 days, like usually, where you choose to do some spiritual disciplines. And one of them is some sort of fasting, right?
Right.
Like there's some like things, like some days where you don't eat meat, or you eat like 2 meals instead of 3, and like simple meals, or you give up something that is like full of indulgence for you, that you can like fill that time or that void with something else that's healthier for you, you know, like kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's just like stuff like that. I think there's wisdom in that, like for anybody, for anything, like, and you see that in all traditions, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I think coming back to everything that we've talked about is that we can apply these principles to anything. We could apply them to relationships. We could apply them to music. We could apply them to building our brand, whatever. It's like, you know, sometimes you need to make a change, or sometimes we need to take some things out, and we need to just maybe silence some things here and there, and then infuse it with something different, you know, like, and just pivot, or just, you know, whatever it is. Maybe we just need some introspection time, right? Like in that sense, and in hopes that it's always going to make us a better, like, come back better, right? Like that's the goal. So, I mean, you know, I know that we're getting to the end of the podcast here with you, and you're probably going to mention that you're going through a little change with your brand here. And so, I mean, I wish you the same sort of thing when you take that breath and come back bigger and stronger, or whatever it is that you're going to do. I'm looking forward to hearing about that and seeing it.
Thank you very much. You know what? I gotta say, this interview has been incredibly dynamic. I enjoy it quite a lot. I really enjoy this conversation. I feel like it's so much more dynamic than some of the last couple of episodes that I have done, and I appreciate that so much. Before I do end this podcast, one thing I want to do is I want to do a little bit of a role play here. Does that sound cool to you?
Okay, sure.
All right. I'm going to pretend that I'm your 25-year-old son, okay? And we're going to disregard all the stuff that's been going on in my life and everything like that. We're going to pretend all of that does not exist. It's literally this situation, all right? I'm coming to you. You know that I've been completely straight edge for my entire life, right? I have not drank before. I've never smoked weed. I've never done anything, and literally nothing. The most that I've done would be probably like sips of alcohol just to see what it tastes like, but that's it, right? But I'm incredibly inclined to expand myself as an individual, as I have been talking about earlier here.
Okay.
Now, the one thing, though, is that I don't give a shit about drugs at all. I don't care about smoking weed. I don't care about doing crack or coke or anything like that. Or MDMA. I don't give a shit about partying. But one thing I do care about is I'm interested in expanding myself in a spiritual way. And psychedelics have been something that have always been intriguing for me. And I come to you as you're my dad in this situation, and I want to do shrooms for the first time this summer. What do you think?
Okay, well, let me see if I can put that on. Just like, let me think about that. So, hypothetically, if I was your dad, I would always want to say that, you know, there's a whole like do as I say, not as I do thing,
Sure.
right? You know, and like I can never say that I've never done drugs, or that I've never drank, or I've never done any of that stuff. So I've definitely experimented with that stuff, or sometimes maybe put myself in situations that maybe I shouldn't have. And so I know that that's sometimes a part of life. I don't recommend it, right? That's what I would always say. And I always say anything that alters our state, personally, I think is dangerous, right? And so, so for me, like, I don't do drugs, but I drink,
right.
You know, and I try not to drink excessively, because I don't like to be out of control.
Yeah.
You know, because then we tend to do stuff we regret, or we don't remember, or we don't, you know, like kind of thing, right? So that's always my caution to people. on the other hand, like this whole psychedelic thing, there's a movement right now that I also see. So Jason Silva, I don't know if you know him, is big. So he was a big sort of. I blogged about him. I said he was a part of the light bulb that went off for me in my blog and my writing.
Sure.
Because I got to see him live. And anyway, that's a whole different story. But his whole thing, he talks about that, and he's big on that, and because he's in search of the awe, right? Like the awe experience and whatever, and I'm trying to understand that. And he believes that the whole psychedelic thing it can be okay within a controlled environment, or like a safe situation, right? And so, I mean, maybe he's right. I don't know. I mean, that would be my suggestion. It's like, if you're gonna do it, like, do it in a safe environment, I guess, like, and in moderation, and like in caution and all that kind of stuff, right?
Sure.
Like, so, but like I said, I mean, me personally, I'm afraid of anything that just like will make me be out of my mind, right? Like, kind of thing. So
that's fair.
Yeah. So that would be my advice.
That's totally fair, man. See, for me, it's always been incredibly interesting, the thought of psychedelics, and to experience something that to me currently is unfathomable, right?
Yeah.
And the thing about it is that there's so much music that has inspired the people that have made, there's so many people that have used those things to create music inspired by those experiences, right? And it's something that has always been interesting to me, and I just feel like it's another way of making your brain work in ways that you otherwise would have never done, right? I just feel like eventually what I want to do is I want to do shrooms, to just experience what that's like. I want to do LSD because I really want to know what that's like. And then I eventually want to do DMT to understand what it's like to die without actually killing myself.
Oh my gosh, man.
So
I wish you luck with that, but I will not be joining you. I can definitely say LSD I would be very cautious about, because, they say like one bad trip can make you a vegetable for your life,
Yeah.
That's like chemical stuff like that is really like dangerous.
Sure.
But I mean, I get that whole discussion about artistry and that, like, being, in a different mental state. Mm-hmm. I probably fall on the other side of that. Like, I really think there's a lot of people. Sure, I grew up in the era of like the Doors and Hendrix and all that kind of stuff. Like, and there was a lot of talk about that back then, even. And a lot of people now say that they feel like they can't create unless they like smoke
unless
weed,
they do that,
something like that. And I don't believe that. Like, I feel like there's different ways that you can achieve that. Like,
sure.
And sometimes even just like meditation we can
achieve those kinds of things
with our mind, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's just my opinion. I'm never a fan of anything like putting anything artificial in our body that's going to change who we are, like kind of thing. And I just think it's dangerous.
That's fair, man. That's totally fair. And I absolutely understand your caution. Now, the one thing for me is, I see people like Mike Tyson, for example, right? Mm-hmm. I love Mike Tyson. I think he's fantastic. I saw in 1998 when he was doing his first press release when he got the World Heavyweight Championship belt as the youngest person to ever do that, and he still holds that record. And he was so articulate and he spoke incredibly well. And then as he's gotten much older and he's gone through tons of cocaine and all this other stuff, being hit in the head as a boxer and everything, he doesn't speak like that anymore. And it's something that I personally don't want to ever lose. So this is something that I do take with extreme caution, but it's something that I do want to take a part of just to understand the mindset of those people that I do revere. And the thing about it too is that I genuinely know that, say, even John Lennon, for example, has been quoted to say that he would have made that music regardless. It's not the drugs that made him do that. So I fully understand that. Absolutely. Yeah. But it's just something for me. I just don't know if I could experience emotion after death. I just don't think that I would be happy to experience life and not experience a psychedelic. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, fair enough. I've heard and I've probably experienced in my life, like there are times that we experience those same sort of feelings or experiences without the superficial stuff. And I think that it's our daily life that keeps us from that, because we're so like in this routine of, like we're always doing the same stuff, right? And so like we have the stresses of work, of school, of relationships, like kind of thing. And so there's not that space, where sometimes if you go away for a while or whatever, you can have that. And I think because often we're talking about artistry when we're talking about that, although
Sure.
we could be talking about anything, like it could be cooking, it could be whatever, in your daily life or in your relationship where you want to experience brilliance, right? Like
Yeah.
in that sense, and in your writing or anything. And so I look at people like honestly, I don't believe, maybe I'm wrong, but like there are a lot of famous artists and people who have impacted us in the world, like writers and painters and things like that, who weren't necessarily like these other people we've talked about who were like getting high in order to do that. Like I think of people like Da Vinci and like like C.S. Lewis and like, just like big names that have been around, like, and honestly, they found a way to tap into what it is to create that space so that they could create what it was that their gift to the world was, right?
Right.
So I believe that there's a way to do that, but you have to create the space. And I really come back to like a big part of my business as a brand manager or as a coach in that way was to allow that for my clients. Was like, okay, well, here you are a musician, or here you are a painter, or here you are a designer, or here you are whatever, a restaurant owner, whatever it is, whatever your product is or your art is. You need the space to be able to do that. So let us or let me or whatever handle the other stuff.
Yeah.
That takes away from that from you, so that you have the room in your life to do that, create the music or create the art or create, whatever, and let us handle the business side or, that sort of thing. Right. And so anyway, so I just think people need to find that space.
100%.
And so I believe that sometimes the other stuff, the superficial stuff or the artificial stuff is we try to accelerate that process, right?
Yeah, 100%. Just so you know, in terms of myself, I find that at 25 is where I feel like it's appropriate for me to do shrooms. I don't really see myself in the near future doing any of the extra stuff just yet. I've always thought that like when I'm 35 and I have like kids and stuff like that, that's when I want to do LSD, because I feel like it'd be interesting to get to a point where I have incredible responsibility and then just sort of like flip it and then see what happens. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it might be fun, but it might be something to make a movie about. But
well, for me, I just feel like a lot of people get just so boring. Even people that I went to high school with just get so boring. You know what I mean? I feel like it would allow, I just feel like, I don't know, I feel like it would just keep life interesting. You know what I mean? Challenging myself and expanding myself at a point where I try to make sure that I would never, ever think to myself, this is my final stage. This is my final form. I would never, ever want to think that. I always want to expand myself, even at a place where I feel like I'm at the most, where I have to be at the most tight. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and there's two sides to that, right? Like at one time, in one respect, they say like get it out of your system when you're young because you're not responsible for anybody else. Because like when you have kids or whatever, you're responsible and you have to, if you screw up your life, you're gonna, by making like using drugs or whatever kind of thing, like then you fail those people. But on the other hand, there's this whole movement, like what you're talking about, or this attitude now, where exactly that. It's like, how do you spice up your life, or how do you, not become like monotonous, right? And you see movies like, I think it's like The Neighbors and stuff like that, like where you have these like grown people who are like trying to get in touch with that fun side again, like kind of thing. I mean, yeah, it's Hollywood. I honestly think Hollywood has like, has been a bit issue for us, while we're talking about this, which I probably will address in my second book, is that when it comes to certain things like love and relationships and and reality, in a lot of ways, Hollywood has painted a picture that's not real, or
no, of course not.
It confuses us, So when we think about like even romantic relationships, above all, that's what we see in Hollywood. We think that that's what we want, like that's what we're looking for, because that's all we see all the time. Like it's got to be like this. At some point in our life, we've got to chase somebody down in an airport, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like don't get on that plane, But
yeah.
So I've been watching The Bachelor, because my grandmother, I blame her. She got me into it. But there's an example. It's like, so how many of us have that experience? I mean, in some ways, as a single person, you kind of have that experience all the time because you get to date different people. But where you're like dating at one time, you're dating like 30 different people or whatever, and you get to like knock them off, you know, like, you know, like, it's not real, right?
No, of course. Of course.
So yeah, anyway.
Yeah. Yo, Dad, thanks for the advice, man.
No problem. So, I mean, I'm just looking at the time. Like, any final stuff that you want to wrap up with here?
No, I don't really have anything else, really. Do you have any questions for me at all?
Not really. I mean, I think we kind of flushed out a lot of it in this. You know, like I said, I was interested in what your goals are with this podcast and that, and so I kind of alluded to it earlier that you talk about taking a little break and kind of coming back. So maybe just for me and for your listeners, you could probably just like end us off with telling us a little bit about what your plans are for that or your vision. Or
well, there's a particular lyric that comes to my mind. It's by the Chili Peppers on the song Can't Stop. Anthony Kiedis sings "Come Back Strong" with 50 belly dancers. And not in a literal way, but for me, it's an energy thing. Like, come back strong with that energy. That's basically what the plan is. I'm essentially coming back. I'm bringing For the Culture Canada on level 2, and it's going to be much, much better. But for the time being, I'm in hibernation mode right now. So for the time being, I'm not going to promise anything at all.
Okay.
I can't predict the future, so I won't.
That's true. Well, all we have is now. That's what we said at the beginning. So, I mean, it's been a pleasure for me to be a part of this, as we wrap up this first phase.
Of course.
I'm looking forward to what's coming next. And, who knows, maybe we'll have another one of these in the next go around.
I'd love to, man, when your second book comes out 100%. By the way, where can they find your first book, your current one?
So right now, the main place is on Amazon. You can just look up Chocolate Covered French Fries or my name, Kevin Kishor, just like it sounds, Kishor. And you could find me on Instagram, kevin.kishore. You find me on Facebook. My public page for the vlog and the book is, the username is @ChocolateCoveredFrenchFries. And also, you can get the book through me too, so you could just message me, because I've heard that some people maybe like having to wait for it from Amazon. So you could always just send me a message and I'll take care of it, because my family owns a bookstore and we have copies as well. So I'm gonna have a book launch, and I'm looking for a publicist. So if anybody listening out there wants to get on board and work with me, holler at me, DM me on Instagram or on Facebook, and let's chat, because I'm looking forward to this. So I'm heading away here for a little kind of getaway and heading to a wedding and stuff with my sister, and I'm hoping that I'm going to start working on the second book. So let's roll out this first one together, and everybody get it. And then by Valentine's Day 2020, the next book should be ready. That's the goal.
Yes, that is fantastic. That is fantastic. Please make sure that you check out all of Kevin's Instagram, Facebook, whatever social media he is at. Also make sure that you check his book out. He's a very interesting and wise person to go to for mentorship as well, if you do need that. So please don't be afraid to hit him up in the DMs or anything like that.
Yeah, and I do coaching as well, and that's the next phase that will come, like, along with the podcast and all that too. But like, people could do, they can book me for coaching, speaking gigs, that sort of thing. And I've just started putting the stuff up on my YouTube page too. So again, it would be my name, and I'm gonna start to put all the vlogs on there. So yeah. Look me up.
Hell yeah. Please, and make sure that you don't forget to subscribe to For the Culture Canada on Spotify or Apple Music or SoundCloud or wherever you like to listen to podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and social media of any sort at For the Culture Canada. And if you have any sort of feedback, if you have anything to let me know of, if you want to give my show a 1-star, please let me know why, or a 5-star, please let me know why. I would appreciate it a lot. Anyway, thank you so much for your time and consideration. I'll see you on the next episode. Bye.